Everyone, this is Tim Picot with the Liberty Advisor, and today we are joined by a special guest. We are joined by Etienne de la Boutie squared. Many of you, at least from the Anarchapulco and Liberty volunteers community, might know him. Now he is the author of a book that was called "Understanding Our Slavery." But I think do you have a new name for the book, Etienne?
We did. We have rebranded and expanded the book, so it's now in its 4th edition, 5th printing, and it is now Government, and government is in quotation marks. The biggest scam in history exposed, and it's at government-scam.com.
All right, we do have that on screen right now. Maybe do you want to tease people a little bit about what like your background is, and then maybe what we'll get into? Because I think what we're going to do today is we're going to do more of like a news style segment where we go over some of the articles, and then the really juicy stuff we're going to kick that over to my podcast over at the Tim Picot, the Liberty Advisor. So we'll go through, do a normal change the news type segment over here, and then probably get into a lot of the more juicy, uncensored stuff, more podcast format. But do you want to let people know a little bit about your background, at least from the financial sector, and then maybe a little bit about your book and kind of like this kind of the main thesis on the pandemic that's going on?
Yeah, so I mean, I've kind of been blessed with an interesting history. I worked on Wall Street for a bit, kind of on the tech side, creating networks for market data, trading floor technology. Worked alongside traders, with traders on different trading floors. I worked at one of the big 4 think tanks in DC. In my youth, I ran a national third-party political campaign, and I was in DC's largest CEO networking group. And so I've gotten this opportunity to, observe quote unquote politics up close and personal. I lived outside of Washington, D.C. on what I call the Silicon Plantation of Northern Virginia. There's a little kind of tech corridor there, mostly centered on internet and networking technologies that I kind of came out of. And so I've gotten to observe D.C. And what I do in the book is I make the case that government was never designed to help protect society, life, liberty, or property, but it was always intended to rob and control society. It's a technique of controlling people. And the way they do it is they slip you this religion called statism, using the same kind of unethically manipulative tools and techniques of a cult. And it's the government and the media working together. And because the media is on the kind of same side, they make it look like it's all these different platforms, but it all rolls up to a handful of companies. And control of the perception is the name of the game. And so that's called the mighty Wurlitzer. The CIA calls it the mighty Wurlitzer. And if we can control the inputs that we give to the population, we can control the outputs. And so I'm exposing that in the book, Government, the Biggest Scam in History.com. And the final thing people should know is we just dropped a major expose on the pandemic, who's behind it, how they're benefiting, the timeline at government-scam.plandemic. And our thesis, this was never about COVID. This was always that COVID was simply the manufactured excuse for bailouts. We're going to have bailouts. We've already spent the money. We already know how we're going to do it. Now let's figure out how we're going to justify it to the people so that we can close down independent businesses, we can engage in disaster capitalism, we can wage economic warfare against the people. And so that article is at government-scam.com/plandemic. And we break it down, and we're also promoting Freedom Fridays, trying to reopen businesses this coming Friday, May 1st. And you can get that at government-scam.com/Freedom Friday.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that. And can you get a little bit into you worked on trading floors doing different technology, isn't that part of your background as well?
Yeah. So I mentioned that. So at one time, I worked for one of the major network providers that provided connectivity for all of the major trading floors on Wall Street. And so our parent company was one of the big market data providers, and was delivering market data to 2,000 plus financial institutions, like there were 2,600 plus financial institutions on Wall Street around the world, kind of like Reuters, kind of like Bloomberg, exact same, the market data that you see when you see video of traders talking to 3 telephones simultaneously while looking at 10 screens. So we provided the screens, and because we had that network there, we could layer in additional trading applications or market data applications to Wall Street participants without them having to go get a different network connections. That was kind of like our competitive differentiator in the market. And so I had offices in New York and Boston and Atlanta and Miami and St. Louis and Herndon. And we sold solutions to other banks, financial institutions around the world.
All right. Well, no, definitely a great guest to have on for what we've got in store today. So what do we have in store today? So the first article I want to talk about is Biden wants a new stimulus a hell of a lot bigger than $2 trillion. So in an interview, the 2020 candidate courts the progressive left, and I hate even calling it the progressive left, for a huge new green infrastructure bill while hammering banks and Trump. And so it goes on to say Joe Biden wants a more progressive approach to economic stimulus legislation than Washington has taken so far, including much stricter oversight of the Trump administration, much tougher conditions on business bailouts, and long-term investments in infrastructure and climate that have so far been largely absent from congressional debates. In a fiery half-hour interview with Politico, the presumptive Democratic nominee sounded a little bit angrier and less moderate primary rivals, Senator Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, Pocahontas. So the former vice president said the next round of coronavirus stimulus needs to be a hell of a lot bigger than last month's $2 trillion CARES Act, and that it needs to include massive aid to states and cities to prevent them from laying off a hell of a lot of teachers and cops and firefighters, and that the administration is already wasting a hell of a lot of money. Now, to my knowledge, I don't think I've seen any, teachers or cops or firefighters. Certainly cops and firefighters. Have you seen any of them laid off? That's probably not the biggest part of the story, but it seems like, a grabbing for heartstrings type statement.
No, I see them out raising revenue on the public, putting them in jail for victimless crimes and doing the exact same, criminality they've always been engaged in. They can force people out of business. And even though the people they're forcing out of business with these lockdowns and closures have to go out of business, they just they'll just take more and more from the population.
Yeah, and so one of the other things I see from the article over here as I'm going back to the screen, it says that basically Biden says that he wants to have this government watchdog named Earl Devaney to oversee the Recovery Act because he's the toughest son of the bitch in the country, and he really means that. He's not even joking, he says. I'm paraphrasing this. And said the last thing he wants is anyone watching the $500 billion going to corporate America, for God's sake. And he's talking about Trump, basically having these big bailouts. And now it's very unfortunate because it almost seems like everything, especially if Dr. Frank ends up watching this, Dr. Frank Danbury, it seems like everything that Trump and people that voted for him, including myself, that he campaigned on, this is like the worst nightmare than if like Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders or any one of these other clowns got in there. And to me, this really was about a bank robbery. And what's the old saying is, if you want to rob a bank, buy a gun. If you want to rob the world, buy a bank. And I feel like, this is, that times a trillion, what just went, I guess multiple trillion, what went on. But, what did you make of this new call for, having another bailout that's much, much bigger than what we've already seen? And, obviously this is probably not the end of the bailouts as we now know it.
This is really stealing the silverware out of the kitchen and ripping the copper pipe out of the wall. And so now that all Washington, D.C. is going to feed at the trough of bailouts and stimulus and infrastructure and everything else they can, manufacture trillions of dollars for to hand it to their friends and accomplices on Wall Street and in the media and in these monopoly, cartel companies that are aligned and associated with the federal government and the central bank. That's what this is all about. And I think that was the reason that we had COVID. I think they knew that the Treasury market, they weren't going to be able to, continue financing the Treasury market in a way that was believable. They'd been caught doing straw purchases for years. They've been caught buying the Treasuries a couple of days after they were, sold at the auction from the primary dealers because other people weren't buying the Treasuries. And so this year, the amount that they were going to have to finance was already 25% more than last year, which was, I'm assuming, probably like 25% more than the year before. And so, they're long-term planners, and I think they knew that this was going to happen. And so they've been, cooking up this like little scenario that explains away the collapse of the stock market and provides the manufactured excuse to have the bailouts in the first place. And that excuse just happens to allow them to lock you in your house at the same time that they're able to begin censoring internet and social media, which they're doing on every major social media platform. They're able to keep the protesters off the street, especially in Hong Kong, Paris, and other places. They're getting a whole lot out of this, but the main thing they're getting out is it's providing the smoke screen for the theft of trillions handed to private banks and private companies through BlackRock Capital and the Fed and the Treasuries, quote unquote bailout programs, special purpose vehicles, the TARP 2, TALF 2. That's what the real story is. That's the matador. COVID is the cape.
Yeah, no, a great way to put that. You started off by saying that they're stealing the silverware, but let's be reminded that it was the Clintons who actually stole, was it George Washington's silverware on the way out of the White House? And yes. It's crazy because I did like a 2-minute Facebook Live. It was September 16th, 2016. And I said, I think Donald Trump is going to win and they're going to blame it on the Russians. And I talked about that story and the connections to Uranium One in like a 3-minute Facebook Live when I had like 12 people on my page following me. So, and speaking of people following this, we are almost at 10,000. So we are like 30 subscribers away from 10,000 just after about a month and a half here. So, really appreciate everyone that has subscribed. And please help us get to 10,000. We should easily do that today. But and especially with guests like Etienne de la Boutie, it's just a wealth of information. Now you also mentioned buying treasuries and how you can track the QSIP markets. If you guys actually want to see how that's done in real time, that was actually one of the things I talked about in my Anarchapulco presentation from February, where I actually laid out and through different Zero Hedge articles and other people's reporting how you could track the QSIP numbers to see that the treasury, that basically, because there was a law saying the Fed couldn't just do it themselves. And so what they had to do as an end run around that is they had to basically have the banks buy it. And then when those bonds settled a day or two later, then the Fed would then come in and buy it from the banks. And so that in of itself is a scam and a basically a secret stealth bailout that John Snyson and I have been reporting on going back to September 2000, this past September when the repo market really started kicking off. Now the repo market is not as huge because they don't even require you to hold on to any of the money anymore. So the banks aren't even required to hold on to any of your money, which then begs the question, what are banks even doing? But speaking of oversight, we have from Jonathan Turley that we've got brothels out in Nevada who are getting some of the stimulus money, and obviously that's ground zero for people that can't do anything, especially if you're in that industry. And then now we're seeing out of a pandemic crisis, what could a new deal look like? And, of course, we've got guys, Rahm Emanuel, Mr. Never Let a Good Crisis Goes to Waste, says we basically have a 21st century economy wobbling on a 20th century foundation, said Rahm Emanuel, the former mayor of Chicago and chief of staff to President Barack Obama. We need to upgrade the system to have a 21st century economy in all respects. And especially, this is very rich coming from Rahm Emanuel, who, Chicago has the worst pension system, or Illinois people, sorry, I pronounced the S last time and I had people in the comments saying that, especially my grandma. Funny, I gave a presentation at Arizona last April, basically outlining everything that just went on. And I asked my grandma, how she liked it. She's like, you said Illinois. There's no S in it. I'm like, that's what you got out of it? Like this brilliant masterpiece of a presentation, and that's the very first thing you say. So apologize to that. Usually I'm just referring to Chirac, but how do you think? Because you're talking about these are all long-term planners, and when you take a look at the pension system and how this is never letting a good crisis go to waste, Mr. Rahm Emanuel himself, what do you make of this? All these new deals and all this new crap that they're trying to shove down our throats over here.
So I think it's economic warfare. I mean, we're looking at economic warfare being waged against the population by this organized crime system centered around central banking, and using government as a technique to rob and control society. And that economic warfare is it's about devaluing the dollars so that you don't have the ability, so that they're stealing the value out of what you earn and save. It's about disaster capitalism, driving businesses driving independent mom and pop businesses, restaurants, coffee shops, yoga studios, little boutique hotels, driving them out of business so they don't have economic resources to challenge the government. It is about nationalizing industry on a very, very wide scale, whether that's, all of the regulations that the hospitals have to put up with. Where that's how they've been able to stoke up this COVID thing, is because the hospitals are, they can put these incentives to say, hey, we'll give you more money if you say you have COVID patients, or we'll give you more money the more people you put on ventilators, knowing that that's going to pop the deaths. And so the more control they have over organizations like hospitals or the media or restaurants, the more they're able to control society. And so I think this is wide-scale economic warfare against the population to make them poor, just as the information revolution begins to expose the system as being illegitimate. Now more and more people are recognizing it as organized crime. More and more people are coming out and calling it organized crime. Derek Brose, when he was running for mayor of Houston, one of the most popular things he said in the entire campaign was during a campaign event among some of the other mayoral candidates. He described the local control of the Houston media and the control of the Houston government as organized crime, to which several on the panel agreed, and that clip went viral. And so just as people are figuring out who's robbed the bank, they're going to pull the punch bowl out and force everybody into their homes. And, it's not get down on the floor and freeze. It's get into your house and sneeze. And we're literally, while we're robbing the bank, we're going to lock everybody in their house. And it's economic warfare.
Maybe they'll let us out in time to say America for July 4th, and we can have all the patriots, talk about how free we are. Obviously.
Oh, no, hey, I got good news for your audience. We're all getting out of here sooner rather than later. Freedom Friday, next May 1st. We're reopening businesses. I'm here in Silicon Valley, which is one of the largest concentrations of libertarians and voluntarists and anarchists in the country. I'm here with David Rodriguez. We're working on a campaign to reopen business in Santa Cruz, and we're templating it to give other people the tools, the flyers, the verbiage to be able to do it in their neck of the woods. And we call that Freedom Friday, and you can see it at government-scam.com/Freedom Friday. But the idea is to get behind your local merchants, get in a certain particular area, shopping center, ideally with coffee shops and restaurants, and support them to open on Friday, supported by their customers and the Liberty community, to say, hey, we don't want any more lockdowns. We're not going with it. We're not going along with it anymore. And if the monopoly government police show up, the community is there to say, hey, we don't want you. Look at all these people here. We all want to go back to normal. We're going back to normal, whether you want to or not. You can't arrest all of us, and everything. And we recognize what you're doing is illegitimate. And so that's not just us in Santa Cruz. That's going along nationally. We've been on calls with other leaders. So # Freedom Friday, community gardens, Film Your Hospital, reopen these businesses and patronize them. Go to help at your local food bank, but we're going to reopen society. And we're starting with the hospitals. And if there's a pandemic, we'll call the whole thing off. But since we've already been to the hospitals around here, and I've already heard from other people that have investigated the hospitals, and we know for a fact there's no pandemic, we're not that worried about what we're going to find on Friday morning.
Yeah, speaking of people that are even, kind of calling out what's going on, you even have Bill Maher presses Pelosi on coronavirus spending, saying funny money may collapse economy into depression. And so the real-time, I'm glad that I don't even know what it's called. The real-time host saying house of cards will eventually collapse, resulting in depression. The back and forth comes as President Trump signed off on a $484 billion package on Friday to replenish a small business lending program prompted by the pandemic. The package also provided $100 billion for hospitals and COVID-19 testing, as some states slowly reopen their economies. I know we can bail out certain sectors as we have done in the past. I just don't know how we can keep indefinitely writing checks, Maher said to Pelosi in a remote interview. We were $20 trillion in the hole to begin with, and all world governments who are already in debt are doing this. How can the whole world be writing this funny money? I'm worried about the whole thing collapsing and we go into a depression, he later added. I mean, mind you, this is Bill Maher, because it's a matter of, it says it's a matter of life or death, Pelosi said. And then she goes on to say, the more we invest in, and I'll say in air quote, invest in science and health, the quicker our economy will recover from the pandemic. We expect a return on this money. Yeah, return on this money. People that are, $23 trillion in debt, and that doesn't even include, that $23 trillion doesn't even include Social Security, doesn't include Medicare, which is a much, much bigger funded obligation than even that. And I will credit Howard to being the one that told me that the Social Security office, there's basically, the trust fund is a filing cabinet that's not even that much bigger than the filing cabinet behind me. That's just filled with IOUs in a filing cabinet in West Virginia. And so I have to credit Etienne for letting me know that, because I've been letting people know about that left and right. But it just exposes what a scam this is, Etienne.
It is one giant scam, and it's $24 trillion, and the unfunded liabilities are anywhere between 75 and 200 trillion in unfunded liabilities. And for the audience, an unfunded liability is something like Social Security that they agree that they owe you, and that they agree that they owe, they just haven't begun making payments. And so if this was like a real business or a free market insurance company, there would be, you'd be able to take a look at that business and evaluate it and say, hey, do they have the resources? Are they invested in the right things to be able to pay these benefits they're promising me? And the government doesn't claim that they even have the money. They said they were going to put it in a lock box, and that lock box is this filing cabinet in West Virginia, where they print out these bonds on a laser printer and just go ahead and assume that you and your kids and your grandkids are going to pay for trillions and trillions of dollars of IOUs that they're sliding to their organized crime accomplices through no bid contracts and monopoly privileges and the TARP, the TALF bailouts, and this scam is, more and more people are kind of realizing the scam. And once you realize the media's in on it, and kind of how their little control perception program works, then the magician's trick loses its power. And I think more and more people are waking up to how they've been swindled and robbed. And that's why they're having to do things like, try and force the entire population into their homes and manufacture this obviously fake pandemic.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I was trying to pull this up on screen, but of course the article, right as I'm trying to pull it up, is just like going back and forth, trying to think. But if you guys can, this image is just great, and especially the one where it shows Bush over there. So here we go. We've got it right now. I'm going to actually share this also with Etienne. So just 1 second here, guys. So we got boom over there. So there you go. So we've got, this is literally your Social Security trust fund, just a small filing cap. I mean, this is what this is like what all the confidence and everything is just based off of this. I mean, it's just so ridiculous. And if this whole thing that they were doing wasn't so evil, it would actually be brilliant. But, then, in other words, the fund is actually debt. And somewhere down here, I remember there was a brilliant quote by Bush, which, a lot of people in America think there's a trust in the sense that we take your money through payroll taxes and then we hold it for you. And then when you retire, we give it back to you. But that's not the way it works. There is no trust fund, just IOUs that I saw firsthand that future generations will pay for either in higher taxes or reduced benefits or cuts to other critical programs. And so and so this was, a quote by Bush, which is, just telling, because, it's not like he's, known for being the most brilliant guy in the world. But what we're going to do is we're going to wrap it up there. We're going to come back with some more information about the stock market for video 2 of the day, and then come back and have another podcast over at my channel. But really appreciate Etienne's time today. Make sure you guys like, subscribe to the channel, We do have down below in the tickers, you'll see where you can subscribe to the Change the New podcast. So then that way you can actually, listen to us instead of having to, we're out and about doing yard work, doing different stuff this time of year. Well, I guess if you're allowed to be out and about, or if you just don't care. So, but yeah, and you guys can, if you want to get everything that I see that put out, if you can go to thelibertyadvisorshow.com, it will have all the Change the News podcasts, of all of my appearances on World Alternative Media, all of my regular podcasts that we're going to be doing with, Etienne and just everything else. So 2 different ways that you guys can subscribe, but thank you so much for this, and we'll be back for round 2 coming right up. Take care.